Britain is becoming a really right-wing country just because the downsides of immigration, all the problems it causes, have become so obvious at this point. It's undeniable. Now, don't get me wrong, our state is still controlled by demented liberals, human rights activists, and closet communists who are trying to glue shut the lid on civil unrest that they have caused through decades of mass migration and a multicultural appeasement strategy. However, when even the institutions are letting slip that this experiment isn't working, when the British public, when polled, are now in favour of mass deportations, reversing mass immigration, and say they don't like Islam very much, the centre cannot hold. The faux consensus of the last how many years that mass immigration is an unalloyed good and diversity is our strength is a fiction that is exhausting itself. So let's go to the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility. This is the sort of like nerve centre of the permanent managerial quango state that really runs Britain. It's a body that is set up by the Cameron government in the 2010s to tell the government how to spend money. It exerts its authority over the Treasury, which subordinates parliamentary sovereignty to experts who consistently have modelled that mass immigration is an unalloyed economic good. Well, last year, they modelled that about half of those on a skilled worker visa in this country are net tax detriments. So they are earning less than the average salary, which means, as Carl Williams for the Centre for Policy Studies has conducted, when you calculate all the visas every year that have been given out since 2021, 95% of them are net tax detriments. And even that 5% are speculative tax contributors. That doesn't even say anything about the cultural concerns, which we'll get onto in a moment. And so now the OBR have come out and said, an official from the OBR, David Miles, who's an executive at the Office of Budget Responsibility, is telling the government to stop relying on mass migrant labour because it is objectively making us poorer. Each of those migrants, those low-wage migrants who do not make more tax contributions than they take, by the age of 81 cost us £465,000 each. Why am I paying to battery farm indolent third worlders in my country? Why do I want 33% of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis who never work staying here? Why do I want, frankly, any Pakistanis or Bangladeshis here? Because they don't want to live in Britain. They want to recreate the conditions of the third world in my country. None of these people should be here. They should be encouraged to return home, or if they commit a crime, they should be swiftly deported. But the fact that the OBR themselves are producing this data and saying, here, that low-wage migrants cost the taxpayer at least £200,000 by the time that they retire. And you can just see that a high-wage migrant contributes a fair amount, but they're a slim minority, and that doesn't talk about the questions of culture either, which, as Eric Kaufman has written in White Shift, is actually most people's concerns about immigration. They cloak them in concerns about logistics, public services, job opportunities, but usually it's about a sense of belonging, a sense of cultural permanence, a sense that they don't like rapid demographic change. So even the high-wage migrants are suspect in cultural terms, but at least they're contributing, right? Low bar. The average wage for a migrant is dipping well below the contribution threshold. And the UK residents, because we're an aging population, is well down. But nowhere in their lifetime do low-wage migrants contribute positively to the tax base. And that is the overwhelming majority of them. And that is presuming they come here at 25, not as children. But as we know, with data from the Netherlands and Denmark, second and even third generation immigrants commit the same economic and criminal behavioural patterns as their parents. So these people are never net tax contributors. And we should know this because the people who comprise a civilization build the civilization. And if you look at the civilizations they come from, they're not prosperous. They're not orderly. They aren't places we would want to live. So let's not take entire populations from those places and bring them here. And people just sort of understand this intuitively now, but it's nice to have some of the numbers backing it up. And speaking of some of the numbers, Yougov did some polling, and it turns out the British public are really Islamophobic, which is just a word invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to stigmatize reasonable critics of Islam so that they can cloak their laundering of jihad through the taboo of anti-Semitism or homophobia. But actually, the British public, in their personal interactions with Islam, the relentless terror attacks, the grooming gang scandal, the constant ethnic grievances brought up by MPs like Ashbana Begum or Ayub Khan in Parliament, the gaslighting, just the fatigue we feel with Islam is now prevalent. And the great taboo that Islam is a religion of peace and as George Bush once stupidly said, we want the same things. That has been shattered. So Yougov have found that half the British public think Islam is incompatible with British values. I know the language around British values is frustrating because we are a nation of a people from whom values, culture, and tradition and history flow, but this is just the way the question is framed. When asked to think, is Islam as a moral and ideological set of beliefs, is it compatible with Britain? Most people say no. 4 in 10, 41% said Muslim immigrants have a negative impact on the country. The proportions feeling this way were much lower for other groups. So it is particularly Islamic immigration they don't like. Now, other immigration has its problems. For example, the ritualistic sacrifice of children accused of being witches in African Christianity, or the ethno-lobbying by Hindu Indians versus Sikhs trying to get an independent Khalistan nation that just shouldn't be happening on my streets. But at least none of them are beheading each other in large quantities, or at least they're not beheading the native population in large quantities. We can, again, prevent all that stuff, but Islam is particularly the problem in our country because of the history of terror attacks and the grooming gangs. And so people have a very negative disposition towards Islam. They recognize it as an alien and incompatible moral system, and yet the government are trying to enforce an Islamophobia blasphemy law on us anyway. And the country, writ large, would like mass deportations. They support mass deportations. Now, Yougov says this is just because they think that there's actually more illegal migration than legal migration. However, the British public, when asked last year, do you support lowering immigration? They misjudged immigration by a factor of 10. They thought it was 70,000, not 700,000 net. And yet, 90%, 9 in 10 constituencies wanted it lowered anyway. So the British public are very far right, according to what the media and the political class would say. And this is particularly pronounced among Reform's own voters. 86% of Reform voters want mass deportations. They agree with the sentence admitting no more migrants and requiring a large number of migrants who came to the UK in recent years to leave. 45% of all Britons, almost half, agree with that. 86% of Reform voters. And Reform are topping the polls. According to recent polls, they're going to get a 300-seat landslide, and Labour are going to lose over 300 seats, and the Tories are going to be reduced to about 14 seats at this rate. So mass immigration is the issue. Mass deportations is the solution. It is not only the right thing to do, it is a vote winner. And so they're saying, here we see majority support for admitting no more new migrants and requiring large numbers of them to leave. The most unpopular position is a large increase in the number of new migrants allowed to come to the UK. Now, they say again, our research shows almost half of Britons, 47%, think there are more migrants staying in the UK illegally rather than legally, including a third of the public who think the illegal figure is much higher. Now, it is much higher than is stated on record, because we know there's at least 2 million illegal migrants here overall. There was at least 1.2 million by 2017. We've had multiple years of increased illegal migration and visa overstays and changes to the visa system, plus the 180 to 200,000 men who have come over on small boats since 2018. So there's bound to be millions of illegals here that need to be deported immediately. But people still, legal or illegal, think these people are here illegitimately, unjustly. And so the legal distinction doesn't really hold, I'm afraid. They just don't want these people here in the first place. So, if a political force presents itself that can substantively represent this suspicion of foreign nationals because they bring their incompatible customs here, if someone will be brave enough to talk about Islam, and to his credit, Rupert Lowe absolutely has, for Restore Britain, if people are courageous enough to address this issue head on, then you will barnstorm an election in 2029. We're just waiting on people to pluck up sufficient courage to do so. Some politicians have said it. You know, Katie Lamb did a video the other day saying that foreign nationals who are on benefits must be made to leave. So that's not just the illegal distinction. That's saying we'll rescind your benefits and we will send you home because you shouldn't be exploiting the British taxpayer. But also we need to be much more concrete on the cultural concerns, not just the economic concerns. We need to say Islam is incompatible with Britain. We need to say there should not be new mosques. We need to say that there should not be cousin marriage, that there should not be the burqa, that there should not be halal slaughter. Anyone found to be violating those laws will be deported. We should, frankly, make the argument to say that Islam itself is just a hostile belief system that we will not allow into politics and into public life. We are well within our rights to do that. And I think that is popular, palatable, and will only continue to grow as the problem gets worse.